let's maybe wrap up this exact point that we're on with the question, can you be Christian and be gay?
Absolutely. And there are a number of open and affirming churches that will affirm that.
Mm-hmm.
I have come to the point where I love the quote we saw yesterday, and maybe you can flash it on the screen when you do the editing.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that people mistake Buddhism for a religion,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't worship Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism is a structure of thought, and I find nothing in Buddhism as a structure of thought that conflicts with my Christianity. And so, and quite honestly, even as a pastor, I struggled for years to figure out what this whole meditation thing is. And Buddhism taught me how to do it.
Yep.
And my spiritual life is much better because my meditation life is better.
And I'd like to jump onto this subject from my perspective. What really changed in my spiritual life as the time that you came out was throughout my entire youth, I obviously grew up in the church, grew up with a ton of Christian friends. And as of the time that you came out, I feel like I genuinely lost all of my friends from my past because they were directly connected to the church groups that you had raised me in. And so when they shunned you, they shunned all of our family, including me.
Right.
And that really spun my head for a minute because I see their behavior to be 100% in contradiction to the message of Christ, once again, and how Christ teaches about spirituality.
Yeah.
And so I actually changed my entire definition for God to a new word, and I would use this word in place of the word God, and the word is undefinable. Because God in its essence is undefinable. And the original word Yahweh was considered the unspeakable word, not because you go to hell if you spoke it, but because the symbol of that word is trying to tell you there's something that you can't even speak about.
Right.
That is more real than the words you're going to try to use to describe it.
Exactly right.
So I got launched down this path of introspection and trying to figure out, I still feel my relationship with God and this undefinable source that created me and my being.
Mm-hmm.
I still
Absolutely.
know that relationship to be true.
Yep.
But I couldn't speak about it with the same level of clarity because of all this confusion.
Yep.
And so I I went down. I chose to go down the path of yoga and the path of meditation because I felt that this was a spiritual practice that would help me build that relationship with Creator on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And really grow that from the inside out.
Yeah.
And it's ironic to me too that meditation can even be feared in the Christian circle.
Yeah.
When in fact meditation is a tool that Christ taught his disciples.
Well, it's a biblical principle. It goes back to David in the Psalms.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just not, in my experience, it was guilt-tripped, but not modeled.
Yeah.
I love your 21 days of meditation. That program changed my life last March.
Yeah.
Yeah, really changed my life. And for the first time, I began to understand who I was in God's eyes and how I was gifted and how I was empowered. And
Wow.
yeah, I've said many times when people ask me the question, God and I are still good friends. I'm just really pissed at his kids. You know, and that's a pretty accurate statement about who and where I am.
I don't remember who said this from Eastern religion, if it was Krishnamurti or someone along those lines, but they said, I love your Christ, but I hate your Christians.
Same idea.
Well,
I'm curious, what did you think sitting at that restaurant in Anaheim when I came out to you?
Yeah.
What was going through your mind in that moment? What was the first thing that went through your mind?
Well, the setting, just so you guys can get a clear picture, we were on Christmas vacation, 2010.
Never come out at Christmas.
Yeah, it's such a bad time. Just don't do that.
Such bad timing.
Save your kids that drama. Just save it for January 5th or something.
But
like
in
that.
my own defense, the only reason I did it then is because I wanted to do it face to face and not over the phone.
Exactly.
So,
Well, so we were in this restaurant and we just launched into the conversation. And as far as my memory of it, it wasn't so much just a dropping of a bomb as much as we just got onto the subject because it was time to speak about this unspeakable thing that was obvious in some way.
Right.
And really the first thing that went through my mind was I liked that we were being honest.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that we were finally talking about an apparently elephant in the room.
Right.
And I will say I didn't have any huge emotional reaction to it. It wasn't something that created in that moment a big response, though obviously the next several years had a huge response.
Right.
But in that moment, I think the first thing was I just liked that we were able to cut the bullshit and talk about who each other is. Because to be honest, I felt like I knew you, but I didn't feel like I really knew who you were until
I remember your first question sitting there. So, Dad, really, you like men? I just thought, yeah. But I remember that being kind of a reset for you.
Well, yeah, and especially from my perspective, you had raised me to be a straight man, but at the same time, you had gifted me with a ton of complexes. And that's what led to all this confusion.
I am so glad you survived your parenting. Oh my goodness.
Oh man, well, with 5 years of therapy, anything is possible.
Only 5?
Yeah,
wow, you did really well.
Yeah, man. By the way, if you guys ever go through any of this, just get yourself a therapist.
Oh yes, get a therapist.
You need to talk to somebody about this that's not involved with the situation.
Yes.
I needed to be able to express my anger in an unfiltered way.
Yep.
But also in a way where I did not want to hurt you with my anger.
Right.
I didn't want to be vicious with my emotions, but that led me to kind of bottling them up.
Yep.
Because I was feeling massive amounts of confusion.
Right.
But then when I was able to find my therapist, he gave me the platform to speak freely and give me the insights that a therapist can.
And one other thing that happened in that conversation, that first conversation that was really right, you asked a number of pointed questions to me. But what I remember the most out of that conversation was your last statement. And it was, well, Dad, I really want you to find a man who loves you the way you've loved me.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to be happy. And in that moment, I knew everything would be okay. And there were times over the next 2 years, especially 18 months, 2 years, where I wouldn't say we had ugly conversations, but we had conversations that needed to clear out some stuff. And
very intense.
Even though they were intense conversations, even though they were sometimes brutally honest, I always held on to that statement in that first conversation, knowing that you were behind me and that you loved me and that this was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I was smart enough in the moment to realize, I've been processing this for, my whole life, but intensely processing this for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you were hearing it for the first time. I knew you, the whole family, needed time to process it and catch up. Yeah. And I understood that. But having you say that in that moment gave me something to hold on to later.
And I think from where I was coming from with that is, to me, it really didn't matter if you were gay or not. What I really wanted to change in our dynamic was that I wanted you to just be yourself, because I felt Even though when I was younger, I didn't know that you were gay. There was no way I could have known that. But I could feel this massive amount of inconsistency. And it was a hiding of your true self. And that's obviously okay for that phase of life. But what I really needed and wanted to move towards was I didn't feel like I knew you, and I wanted to know you.
And that's a great statement, Kevin. One of the things that was true about being in the closet is I had been trained, I had been coached, if you will, that what I was doing was holding my gay in check, holding my queer in check. And that the illusion was that the rest of my life was going on as normal. And all I was doing was modifying my behavior in this one area. After I came out, what I discovered is that there was so much of my life that I had never felt. In fact, it was kind of funny. The first 6 months I was out, people would ask, "Are you doing okay?" And I would often say, "Well, which 20 minutes are you talking about?" And part of that was, for the first time in my life, I was allowed to feel something. And I literally didn't know how to cope with my emotions. And so I was doing this roller coaster thing. Actually, it wasn't a roller coaster. This was a really bad day on Wall Street. And it was really hard. But once I understood how much of myself I'd had in the closet, then that set me free to be me.
Yeah.
And I've often used in fact, I'm kind of known for the metaphor. For the first couple months, I carried a beach ball around with me. Mm-hmm. Because being in the closet for me was being an Olympic swimmer while holding a beach ball underwater. Mm-hmm. And when I came out, the beach ball came up, it splashed, it made some ripples, but it was a hell of a lot easier to swim.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. What was it, how did my coming out affect your sexuality?
In some very profound ways.
Or your sexual identity?
Yeah, my sexual orientation. The very first thing that happened to me in my psychological world was I genuinely felt like I had no more words to express how I felt. And the only thing that I could do as of that moment was go back and reanalyze every lesson you've ever taught me. And it was a very difficult process to go back to those. It really took me back to puberty, and when I'm developing my sexual identity, we got into so many miscommunications at this phase of life.
Sure. And for the record, I did a terrible job. Okay, I just want that on the record.
Yeah.
No, not of puberty, but of helping you walk through that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's fair enough because of what you were dealing with,
right?
But it really made me analyze who I am as a sexual person, because I had been raised with two major pillars of repression, and one was the Christian conservative pillar of repression, and the other was the confusion that happened between the two of us that led into a form of sexual repression, or maybe guilt would be a better word for both of these things.
Guilt-oriented, of course.
And so I had developed a sexual identity that was modeled on how I perceived you and Mom, which was BFFs. You guys were best friends.
Yeah.
And so that's what I thought relationships were. Is you need, and obviously you should be with your best friend, but you should not just be a platonic best friend in a relationship. And I picked that up through osmosis through you two.
Sure.
That the lack of your sexual dynamic transferred into a lack of my sexual understanding. Uh-huh. And it was really confusing for me to understand that it was okay for me to express my sexuality. And I think that took probably 5 years to really get to the point where I am now, where I feel normal.
Right.
You know, my
Right.
version of normal. I've accepted who I am and my own sexual identity.
Yeah.
But it genuinely made me reanalyze all of our talks that we had ever had on the subject. And it triggered anger because I felt like you had lied to me.
Right.
But then once I got past that and we had those conversations and you actually apologized, that was something I never expected you would do, to be honest.
Interesting.
I never knew that you were going to apologize when I threw that into your world. I was just telling you because I needed to tell you
Yeah.
that I felt like you had lied to me.
Yeah.
But when you apologized, it changed a lot in
Yeah.
my world. So,
It's interesting. One of the results, and we've talked about this before, one of the results of my coming out is the more comfortable I got with me, the less I had to justify. And it's a lot, when you like yourself, it's a whole lot easier to love the other people around you.
yep.
And I remember that conversation happened right on that corner across the street.
Yep.
And you said to me, Dad, I have modeled my whole life after a gay man. And I am clearly straight. And I can't figure out what to do with that.
Yeah.
That was about 6 months in.
Yep.
And your honesty in that moment allowed me to step back, confident that you were moving the right direction, and knowing I wasn't going to lose you. But it helped me understand the struggle you were going through, so I could A, be supportive of it, and B, be patient with it.
Yeah.
And that was really an important conversation. It was 30 seconds on a street corner, you know,
Yeah.
with traffic whizzing by.
Yeah.
And you complaining about how cold it was in Oregon after
Yeah.
you lived in LA for a while.
Yeah, but I think that if I could summarize that transition for me, it was genuinely that
Yeah.
finally I realized that you were gay, I was straight, and then therefore I had no tools to work with. Because, and I had
understand
felt
it.
like I didn't have, I would tell my friends, like I felt like I didn't have a father that taught me how to be a man with a woman. And
Yep.
there was a period of time where some of my friends, because they didn't necessarily understand what I was going through, they would push back and say, well, what did you expect? Your dad to like teach you to have sex with somebody? I was like, no, it's not about that. It was
No.
about the
I understand
modeling of when I'm 5 years old or 10 years old or 15 years old, naturally looking at how my mother and father interact with each other.
Yep.
That's what I was never modeled. And so then when I get into the real world and I'm starting to have girlfriends and dating people, and now I'm in my mid-20s, and I've had girlfriends break up with me and or cheat on me because I wasn't fulfilling their needs. And I thought I was. You know,
Right.
I had thought that I was behaving like a man behaves with a woman.
I understand how that's confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So-
totally get that.
But then,
And I own that.
and as I've said, therapy is your friend in this situation.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it was through the help of you, my friends, my therapist, and just finally me going into understanding who I am, that I just finally could accept it. And then I began to explore. And then it all came natural to me. It wasn't something that I feel like I needed to learn, but it was something that I needed to give myself the permission to be.
Yeah.
And I think I pulled that in from osmosis of you not having the permission to be you. That transferred to me even though I'm straight,
Right,
not
right.
having the permission to be straight.
I taught you well how to not be you.
Yep.
I was a good model.
Yep.
And the therapy thing's critical. I mean, you need someone you can be absolutely, totally honest with. And that's what therapists are really good at.
Yep.
And I was really fortunate to have 2.5 years with a great therapist through this process.
Yeah.
And to be able to understand what I thought about me that was true and what I had owned that wasn't mine to own.
Yeah.
So,
By the way, Andrew, my therapist, if you're watching, thank you.
thank you, Beth.
All right, let's go to another subject.
Sure.
Let's talk about what it feels like to be a gay man in 2017. We are on the brink of a new president. We have a whole new dynamic going on in society. And it's going to be a bit of a long talk, I think, this point. But I want to focus on two main elements of this question. The first is the obvious, what is fearful for you and what scares you about where we are. But the second is what excites you and what brings you hope with where we are as of this point in time.